probably a silly question, about transvestites. You see women who are dressed like men, very masculine. Do we call them transvestites?
Actually, no. There's a double standard for women. Society as a whole doesn't think twice about that. Whereas if you put a guy in a dress, that's a whole different story. You've just blown the patriarchy all away.
I think that's what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's okay in our society to want to be like a man
Mm-hmm.
because they're the ones in charge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's okay, but don't have any men trying to dress like women. Okay,
Exactly.
that kind of makes sense in this society. What do you really know about people who are born transgender? Have you ever met someone who's transgender? Well, if you're like me, you're curious but hesitant to ask questions. Well, welcome to Demystifying the Transgender Journey. In our conversations with people who were born transgender, their families, friends, and the professionals who support them, we ask probing questions and discover insightful and educational answers. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. Now let's get right into today's episode. Welcome to another episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. I'm Lynn Murphy, your host. I'm the founder of Women Who Push the Limits and the author of the Amazon best-selling book, 50 Life Lessons from Inspiring Women. Today, we're continuing our conversation with the amazing, inspiring, incredible Wendy Cole, who is now 75 years old. She transitioned when she was 67, even though she knew from the time she was 3 years old that she was not a boy. She was definitely a girl. And she lived her life until she was 67 in that boy's body. And now she's living authentically as the woman that she always knew she was. If you've listened to our previous episodes, you know what an amazing individual she is and how authentically she shares her story. She and I are out there to educate people about the misinformation and disinformation about being transgender. And I'm so delighted to be having these conversations with Wendy. If you haven't seen our previous episodes, be sure to look for them, either on YouTube or on your favorite podcast channel. And today we're going to demystify the terminology around the topic of gender and transgender. So Wendy, thank you for doing this. Welcome back to Demystifying the Transgender Journey.
Hi, Lynn. I'm so glad to be doing this with you, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you.
Well, I'm so grateful that you're spending all this time, that we're digging deep into your story as well as into just kind of what's going on so we can educate people who are listening to the podcast who maybe don't know what's going on with the transgender world.
Right.
And, you shared so much about your experience that's just opened my eyes and helped me understand more about what that's all about. And thank you for doing that. And I know we've got more conversations to go.
Oh, yeah.
Let's start out today talking about terminology people may not be familiar with,
Sure. A lot of times people don't ask questions or don't speak comfortably with people like myself because they don't know what to say. They don't know the words to use. So terminology is an important subject.
All right. So where would you like to start? Should we talk about just the term transgender? Let's start with that.
Sure. A transgender person is someone who is born. Some reason there's a part of the brain where it develops in females to be more predominant, more well developed, whereas in males that area of the brain doesn't develop that much, or it's kind of dormant. So that's kind of a physical difference. And in the second trimester of birth, that's where the sexual differentiation begins. It's where the body begins to either become male or female as far as the genital area goes, the formation of a uterus, ovaries, testicles, penis. All of that starts in the second trimester. Somewhere along the line in that second trimester, the brain also gets signals as to what's going on. In the case of myself and most other people born transgender, somehow or another, the brain got the signal, you're a girl. And the body went and became a boy. And the thing about it is it happens more often than you would imagine. And it's happened for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
So we're not just talking about an X or a Y chromosome then.
No,
There's more than
there's
that.
more than that.
All right.
It's basically how the brain gets wired.
Mm-hmm.
And also, as the body is developing before you're born, the whole physical aspect of it happens. But once you're born, that's when the doctor says, oh, it's a boy. Oh, it's a girl. Well, you don't really know that at that point.
They're just looking at the genitals, right?
Just physical anatomy, period.
And then they're claiming with, instant look at the body that this
Right.
is a boy or this is a girl.
Exactly. Most people also associate the word sex with boy or girl.
Mm-hmm.
The word gender doesn't come into play for most people.
So what's the difference between sex and gender?
Sex is your physical anatomy. Sex also triggers into sexual orientation as to who you're attracted to. But gender is how you identify. Do you feel inside you what your whole alignment of your being is, that male or female? For most people, it's not an issue. From the day they're born all the way through, they know they're a guy, they know they're a girl, and that's all there is to it. They never question it, and they're perfectly in alignment with it. Their whole being is in alignment.
When you're that young,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know what a boy is supposed to feel like, think like, do like, or what a girl is supposed to feel like, think like, do like?
That gets into the socialization with parents. Initially, in my early socialization experience, I honestly, Lynn, I have no clue where I got a doll, where it came from. Somehow I was given a doll. That became my favorite toy. I didn't know there was something that as a little boy, I shouldn't be playing with dolls. I didn't know that. Well, my father came home from work one day and took the doll away and substituted Teddy. And I screamed my head off. I got spanked for that.
Mm-hmm.
I threw Teddy away. Teddy got stuffed back to me. The next day, I cut up Teddy. I mutilated Teddy. My father came home with a new one. And that was it. I had no choice. I was supposed to play baseball. I was supposed to play football. I was supposed to play with the other boys. I didn't like any of that.
So this was internally, you just knew that
Yes.
you were attracted to certain things and not attracted to other things.
Exactly.
Well, but the socialization, there was probably a name for it, girls things and boys things.
Oh, absolutely. Colors. That's the other thing we define gender with. Pink is for girls, blue is for boys.
And heaven forbid that a man should wear a pink shirt, because then he will be decided that he's gay.
Exactly. Transgender is basically, back in the 20th century, there were transvestites. These are men who identify as men. They just like the feel of women's clothes. Periodically, they just enjoy dressing as women and being with other like-minded people who do the same thing. In reality, there's nothing wrong with that.
Not a gender, is that a gender issue or is that something else?
Well, within what we have now with the word transgender and a social construct of the transgender community, a lot of people do feel that it's a gender-oriented thing. That I really don't believe, too, that everybody going through that whole second trimester experience, it affects people at different levels, I believe. There are some people who are just very comfortable with being a guy most of the time, but they enjoy the feeling of being feminine and the feeling of feminine clothing and all of the other things associated with that. I've known quite a few people who do this, and they'll openly tell me, I could never do what you did. I don't want to live as a woman. I don't want to be a woman. That's part of the transgender community, and they're probably the biggest group in a biggest segment in the transgender community. They're guys. They identify as male, except when they're dressed. Then they'll say they're female.
Are they attracted to men or attracted to women or both? Or
this is the confusing area for people outside the community, especially when they look. What that question you just asked does is it pulls in the other thing that is called sexual orientation.
Okay.
And there are quite a few people who do cross-dress, and they'll go to a weekend event. A lot of these guys that go to these events are doing this in secret. They don't even tell their families. Wives don't know. Oh, my husband's on a golf outing, or he's on a business trip. Well, in actuality, he's off having fun with his friends, dressing as a woman, and doing that for the weekend. Within that segment of the community, when you throw in sexual orientation, that's when they start experimenting with gay sex, having either sex with each other, or there are men, otherwise heterosexual, married, usually professional, who look at these events for girls who look like women. They can take them out on dates, they can take them to dinner, and then they go back to the hotel room and they have gay sex. That is a fairly common thing that happens. Not a big percentage, but it's definitely more common than you would think.
So these men don't cross-dress, but they
go after people who do. And I look at it and I think, okay, they're really bisexual. My time within the broad spectrum of the LGBT community, I rarely meet people that say, I'm bi. Most men and women are in that world are gay. And that's understandable. That's fine. That's who they're attracted to. That's how they're wired. When you get into the transgender world, it gets a little more confusing, because then the people start wondering, okay, this person's dressing as a woman, having sex with a man. What are they? Well, in reality, LGB is sexual orientation. The T is gender identity.
Difference. Okay.
Big difference. And then it gets complicated, because the whole sexual orientation thing can be lopped on top of the T. A T can be a G, a B, or an L. If I, for one, were attracted to women, my male facsimile had to be. And that was so I could check off that box. But when it comes to who I'm really attracted to, I have no clue. I wasn't in the right body. I did what I had to do. That's basically it.
And you talked about repressing for so many years that all of that was just repressed. You probably didn't.
The whole sexual orientation thing was repressed.
Yeah.
For me, having sex with a guy, oh my God, that's gross. That's how I felt when I was in my male facsimile.
Yeah.
Now I date heterosexual men.
Yeah.
It has its complications.
One question, probably a silly question, about transvestites.
Right.
You see women who are dressed like men, very masculine, but I don't do we call them transvestites?
Actually, no. It doesn't apply. There's a double standard for women.
It seemed like, because when you were talking about transvestites, you were talking about men dressing as women,
Specifically.
but the reverse
It doesn't apply. Women happen to be more fluid with that.
Okay.
It's a societal thing, I believe.
Yeah. People think they're lesbian.
Oh, they can think that, or if the woman's actually out working with a construction crew, which I've seen, she's dressed more like one of the guys than she is a female, and that's because of her employment and her work.
Yeah.
And society as a whole doesn't think twice about that. Whereas if you put a guy in a dress, that's a whole different story.
Ooh. And why can it be different?
You've just blown the patriarchy all away.
I think that's what it is, right? Mm-hmm. It's okay in our society to want to be like a man because they're the ones in charge, right? Mm-hmm. So that's okay, but don't have any men trying to dress like women. Okay.
Exactly.
That kind of makes sense in a society.
And it's a societal norm that has been around ever since we've been a country, and it's over time in various other social situations. It's the societal norms, and part of the reason why people who are transsexual have always hidden is in most societies, it's not a norm. The British are a little bit more fluid with their things, like, if your uncle goes and comes to a picnic with wearing a dress, that's kind of okay. The family sort of understands it. It's a different societal situation.
Well, when you think about years ago, movies, Mrs. Doubtfire, Victoria, what was it? Victor, Victoria. There are things that years ago we didn't think anything about.
Right.
People cross-dressing. And, now there's such a big deal about it. It's like, this is terrible stuff and we don't want to expose our children to it, and horrible drag queens and things like that.
Right.
I watched Mrs. Doubtfire and I was injured psychologically. I think I handled that pretty well. What do you think's going on with that in this society? Is it the patriarchy again?
It's a combination of the patriarchy and then people using it as a societal and political wedge.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's basically where I would go with that. Yeah. And there are quite a few people trying to legislate us out of existence.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Which is one of the reasons why I've started doing this.
And thank you for doing it.
They're not going to legislate me out of existence. I refuse to go.
Well, and educating people is the way to do that.
Exactly.
I really believe that's so important. And that's why I'm so appreciative of you doing this and sharing so openly.
I learned this almost by accident. I moved into a community, New Hope, Pennsylvania, with a large gay population. And it was kind of, I think in the 80s or 90s, it was known as the San Francisco of the East.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I figured, gay community, they're going to get me. No problem. Yeah. Not a problem.
They didn't get it. Huh?
They didn't get it. Because they, like the rest of society, look at the transgender community and they see all these different subgroups. But they don't know they're subgroups. They don't know that there are differences between them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that we don't like each other or we don't get along with each other. We just have a different lifestyle, different way of presenting, living, and how we see ourselves. And it's all because I feel gender is more of a continuum.
Mm-hmm. You mean there's just X and Y chromosomes?
No, that gender, male and femaleness, is No one's perfectly male. No one's perfectly female. It's a spectrum. I've seen some very good non-binary people dress completely androgynously. You would never know which gender they were assigned at birth.
What about intersex?
Intersex is a whole other world. These are people that actually, when they were born and the doctor went to go slap them on the butt and announce what they were, the doctor looked and couldn't make up his or her mind. It wasn't obvious from the way the genital area was formed. I spoke recently with a woman who she's pretty active in the intersex community. That's its whole separate world. Part of it is in the past, and I believe it still goes on to a degree, I'm not sure, very early on in the infant's life or the child's life, they'll do surgeries to make the genital area more congruent with how the parents are raising the child.
What age are they doing that?
Anywhere from their single digits up. But, like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. The child has no input to it. That's the problem.
Yeah. I mean, not, like you were saying, at 3 years old, you knew you were a girl. So do these children, do they have a gender sense?
I'm not sure if they do or they don't. I've only known one person personally who was born intersex. Her parents insisted on raising her as a boy. The genital area was surgically corrected in early childhood to look like a boy, as much as possible. What happened was, anyway, she did have a gender sense, but it was more toward and after puberty.
Okay.
And that's when she knew she was a girl. That didn't go over well with parents, and she kind of went down the same path that a person like myself would go down. Telling your parents I'm really a girl, insisting on being raised that way, and meeting with all the parental resistance to that.
Yeah.
And it really can mess a person up pretty badly. And that's one of the things that this person I met on LinkedIn and talked with, we had a nice long Zoom conversation about it. She said that's what they're working on, is trying to, limit the surgical procedures until the person can actually make a determination of their own. And supporting people who are going through this. In my case, I had a perfectly normal male anatomy. Most transgender people do have perfectly normal, whatever that is, female or male anatomy. And intersex is a whole different thing.
Okay.
Because they're born with basically ambiguous genitals.
Well, and the chromosomes are probably different too. It's probably not just X.
Yep.
And I had a nurse tell me too that there are, different combinations of chromosomes, that it's not just traditional male or female. That
Exactly.
chromosomes are showing that differentiation.
I know there's a lot of research going on with this, and that's why I just emphasize that gender is highly diverse. It's not one thing or another, and all people can fit somewhere on that male-female spectrum. And it's also situational too. Depending on the situation, you might shift very heavily into the masculine world of behavior, traits, thought, all of that, depending on the situation. If you're under attack,
Yes.
that can trigger different types of behaviors that are more in the masculine side of the gender spectrum.
Self-preservation there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's define cisgender, so we cover that
Sure.
too. I don't know if people know that.
Actually, cisgender was a term that was started up the transgender community to differentiate people like me from people like you. You have always been totally aligned with your gender assigned at birth. Cis is some Latin term which, when you put it on the front of cisgender, it implies you're aligned with your assignment of gender at birth. Most people in society are not familiar with that term cisgender and find it confusing. So I've always tried to switch it around and change it up to born as, or you accept how you're born.
Okay.
As a way of explaining it to people. But in general, that's what cisgender means. You just totally are in alignment with how you were assigned your gender at birth. And people also use the term gender and sex in that interchangeably.
And that's what I learned from you today, is that those are two different things.
Two different things.
Gender and sex. And it's so interesting how you can layer the sex under the gender. Is that what you were saying? The sexual orientation.
Yeah. Sexual orientation.
The orientation
is kind of like layered over everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. What other terms did we miss today? Drag queens?
Oh, yeah. When I first transitioned and started meeting people in transgender world and meeting other people in the LGBT type community, drag is an art form. It's a performance, period. It has typically been gay men and occasionally heterosexual men who will dress in very performative, flamboyant, any particular style that they pick up on. They'll lip sync music and songs. They'll pretend to be different famous women artists, whatever. It's art form. It's something that was done largely in the gay world, and it's associated with gay and lesbian life. It's become popular among regular people to go and see drag performances. I had some people that told me, oh, drag queens are part of the transgender community. No, they're not. In fact, one of the guys that I knew who did drag, I said to him, does it upset you, or do you have any problems with people in my community saying that you're part of the transgender world? And he looked at me and goes, it pisses me off. I'm a gay man. There's no way in hell I want to be a woman. And there's no way in hell that my drag performances implies that I'm a woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's performative, period.
You know, we saw a play a couple of years ago, and I can't even remember the name of the play, but it was a theater, and they had drag performances, and one man was working behind stage, hetero, straight man, and one of the performers, somehow they lost one of the performers, and they talked him into dressing in drag and performing, and it was really cute, but he kept that from his wife, and then she showed up one day, and he's dressed in drag. But, it was strictly, there were the gay performers, but he was not. He was hetero, and
right.
And it was, but even just regardless of the storyline, just watching those performances, it was so much fun. Just to see, the silly stuff and the over the top.
Oh God, yeah. And they're
Hmm.
quite good at it.
Very good at it.
Mm.
Very good at it. Yeah.
And that same guy looked at me, and he knew I was getting my surgery soon. And he looked at me and he said, if you ever want to do drag, you can't have your surgery.
Oh.
You have to have male parts and be a guy.
Well, okay.
So I can't do drag. That's okay.
Can't be drag.
didn't want to anyway.
Yeah, right. I was looking at these terms that you said, which I really
Sure.
appreciate this list.
Yeah.
Gender dysphoria.
Gender dysphoria. Again, that is a term from the latter part of the last century. That has to do with the feeling that I had that this maleness that I'm supposed to be living as doesn't work for me.
Hmm.
And even to some doctors, the term dysphoria is confusing as to what that means and how that is interpreted by the person who is experiencing it. So I actually prefer to look at it as a gender alignment.
Hmm.
That's basically what gender dysphoria is. Your gender that you feel versus your gender assigned at birth are out of alignment.
Hmm. Okay.
And it causes a lot of discomfort for some people. It varies by degree.
Well, and that's what you were feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as you were growing up. And we've talked, I don't know if we need to talk about gender conforming surgery. That's what you had.
GCS, also in the last century, they just called it sex change.
Fancy word for it, right?
Yeah, basically what that is right now is you're taking your physical anatomy and you're changing it so that it fits with how you see yourself and the alignment of your being with yourself.
And it's different from hormone treatment.
Hormone therapy is pretty much the first stage that anyone like myself would go through. Testosterone blockers block that nasty stuff. Testosterone gives you a lot of aggression, anger, can be a very powerful hormone. For me, I could feel it immediately. Not so much the estrogen, but the testosterone blocker.
Oh, okay.
That's another form of medication. Spirolactin is the blocker that they gave me. And that has some side effects long term, so you don't want to be on it forever. And that's why a lot of people, even if they don't ever plan on having vaginoplasty, will go with what is called an orchiectomy. And that's where they remove the testicles.
Oh.
Because that's what produces the testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
And by eliminating them, you don't have to take the blockers anymore.
Okay.
So there's quite a few people in the community, they start with that.
And so those hormones, whether you're going male to female or female to male, but the change in the hormones and changes kind of your, I can't think of the word. Tell me what, it changes your feelings. It changes.
Oh my God. Yes.
Describe that, because I'm getting nowhere with what I'm trying to describe.
Yeah. See, you've always had estrogen.
Yeah, so I don't know the difference.
Exactly. For me, it was like all of a sudden, all of these feelings of it's like the sky just opened up for me. It became a bright, sunny blue sky. I felt great. It was within the first week of being on estrogen.
That's fast. Okay.
It literally convinced me this is exactly what I needed to. For most people, it is rather quick, and it's rather nice. Finally. Where I used to live, I went to an endocrinologist. He was trained at NYU Medical School in Greenwich Village during, I guess, the 80s or 90s, something like that, and saw a lot of girls like myself living there. And at that time, they had no medical care. They were getting their estrogen out of the country or underground somehow. It wasn't prescribed by any doctor because this wasn't something that you could go to a doctor for. It's a psychological condition that has no treatment and no cure. So he told me the sad thing he saw during that time frame was not only were they being arrested by New York City police for appearing in public as female, which was against the law in New York State.
Really?
Yep. 80s, 90s.
So even the drag queens,
Oh, yeah, they got busted too.
any man who was dressed as
As a
a
woman. Could be subject to arrest. I guess that toned down as the century proceeded, but in 1969, when Stonewall was going on, it was the drag queens and the transsexuals who threw the bricks, the first bricks, because they were pissed off at the cops for all the harassment and all the fines and nights in jail and all of that. So the whole feeling of estrogen therapy and everything is just unbelievable. And this doctor that I was seeing where I used to live, he told me the number of patients he sees now who are young and are going F to M, female to male.
Really? Okay.
That he told me when I last saw him that was his largest population of parents, of patients. Parents would bring their daughters in and get prescribed testosterone therapy.
And is that the same amount of power is going
Oh, yeah.
either way? So you give them that testosterone and immediately they're
There's a changeover.
feeling
Feeling it.
the male. Shouldn't that?
It's a powerful thing. It's just difficult to describe how powerful it really is. It really
Well, and that's the first step, right?
And with the female to males, once they're on testosterone for a while, the voice lowers.
Okay.
It becomes a normal male voice. They also develop facial hair, beards, hair on the arms. And I went to the Transgender Health Clinic at the Philadelphia Convention Center. Was one of my first big public outings. I hadn't transitioned to living full-time as Wendy yet. I hadn't moved into my apartment yet. I went to conference in Philadelphia with the first transgender person that I ever met. And that was, I think, June of 2015 or May of 2015. It blew me away. I had lived my entire life thinking I was one of maybe a few people that felt like this. I walked into the convention center. There were over 6,000 people there that day, going from one seminar to another on different aspects of transitioning and all the medical procedures. There were doctors there. I am just like totally mind blown.
Well, you tamped it down for so long.
Oh, good, yes.
You told me you didn't even Google anything about it. You didn't want to feel bad. You didn't want to, suffer in that situation.
Right.
Yeah.
I saw my friend talking with this group of guys, and I kept on walking. I'm doing my thing. I'll let her do her thing, and that was cool. And then I go back and I go, what? This was a group of guys, yes. And they were all F to M's.
That was the first that you were aware of.
Yeah. And then how dramatic the change was for them.
Yeah.
And the deep voices and everything else, it was just mind-boggling. Thousands of people and this and everything.
Well, and you said too that the musculature changes.
Yes.
Like you said for you, for you that changed.
Very
So
much
I'm
so.
sure that F to M, that's going to change too.
Exactly. And it does. Through my friend, I met a couple of other people like that and actually was able to talk with them and everything about the whole experience they went through. And yes, muscular builds, there's no way in hell I would ever look at them and see anything but a guy. Period.
Mhm. Yeah. Fascinating.
Yep. And a little aside, that was I said my first big public outing and everything.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
I was actually at this booth filling out a card registering with Equality PA to, volunteer or do something with them and all of that. I was just overwhelmed by the whole scene. Thousands of people that up until, a month earlier, I never would have known existed.
Well, and probably, you wouldn't have recognized someone as anything other than what they were dressed like, how they were appearing. Same thing when people look at you.
Exactly.
They wouldn't automatically say, "Oh, she transitioned."
Mm-hmm.
So they're hiding in plain sight
Huh?
without the name tag that says, "I'm trans."
Right. Exactly.
Right?
That's one of the things too that I absolutely will never do. And a lot of people in my particular situation don't. We don't apply that to us. We don't advertise that. If I were to meet you at a lunch with a friend or something like that, and we talked, I wouldn't tell you about my past.
Mm-hmm.
It would have to be circumstantially a correct thing to go and do.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I don't say I'm a trans woman or I'm transgender. I would never say it.
Well, and if we were having lunch, I wouldn't go into my medical history either.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Unless something were appropriate to the conversation, but that you're moving forward. You're establishing the present and moving forward.
Exactly.
Yeah. You don't have to advertise.
And as an aside, the following year, I sat at that booth.
You did.
For other people to fill out the cards.
Wonderful.
So
probably with a whole different feeling
mm-hmm.
than the year before.
Oh, totally wonderful feeling.
Isn't that great?
Wow, I went from not knowing anything existed to actually here I am.
With all these people.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Like-minded, like experiences. Is anything else in the terminology that you want to talk about?
Are there any in the list that I sent you that stand out to you?
Well, there's some terms to avoid.
Okay.
Which you're talking about, trans, not saying you're a trans woman, but some of these, it says term to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
Born a man, born a woman, biologically male, biologically female, genetically male, female. Tell me about why those are terms to avoid, because I think I've said that about you.
Well, some of them, okay, born male. Well, that implies what is down between my legs. It doesn't identify what's between my ears.
Okay.
I think that's why they say to avoid them.
Okay.
Because what you're doing with those terms is you're taking the physical anatomy part of the equation and applying it to the gender. Sex, gender. Very different topics.
Yes. Here. It's not the complete picture.
Right.
Okay, so it says to avoid the term transgender or transgender, and best practice is transgender people or transgender person.
I would say transgender person is probably the more correct and the more acceptable. I would agree that I would say I was born transgender. That's the condition that I was born with, which is now in the diagnostic codes considered a medical condition. Finally. And that happened in 2012. We had to wait all that time for that to happen. Up until some point in the 70s, being gay was a psychological condition. And then they changed it. It took from that point all the way through to 2012 for people like myself to be considered a medical condition you're born with.
Well, and looking at this list, when it's talking about terms to avoid, it's saying avoid male to female or female to male, and better to use transgender man or transgender woman or person. Again, it's the sex, gender,
Right.
oversimplification type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe we've addressed that one sufficiently.
I think so.
Okay, is there anything else that you can think of?
Off the top of my head at the moment, no.
And down here when it's talking about other terms to avoid, fooling, posing, pretending, masquerading.
Oh, God, yes.
Which is, and you're talking about passing.
Mm-hmm.
That type of language.
Very negative. It also implies one of the common scenarios that they like to throw out publicly to scare society about people like myself is, oh yeah, they're going to wake up one morning and I'm a woman and I'm going to go into the ladies' room and molest people. That never happens.
No, not unless you're heterosexual male.
Exactly.
I mean, come on. How often have we heard of that happening?
No, and one of the things I was talking with another girl like me who lives in a southern state. This was back in 2021 or so. We were on Zoom, and she's saying to me, she gets very nervous going into the women's room because of the state laws that got passed there, and that she could be arrested and everything else. I said, just stop. Take those thoughts out of your mind. You blend in as a woman wherever you go. You're living as a woman. You're working as a woman. You have a good job. Don't worry about it. Get it out of your mind. Don't put that energy out into the universe. Just go in. What do we do when we go into the ladies' room?
We go in and stall and close the door. Sit down.
Go there to pee. You sit down. And so whether or not, that's the other thing, whether we've had surgery or not, when we go into the ladies' room, you sit down.
Yeah.
Orient your feet in the proper direction, and you just do it. And that's all there is to it. When you get up and you go out, you're just like any other woman there. You wash your hands and you just leave. That's it. Are we going to go in and molest women and children?
Heaven sakes. That's ridiculous. Yeah.
But that's all that feeling behind those words, pretending and all of that. It's just a very negative way of looking at things. Yeah. The reality is totally different.
Yes. And people who are making up these things and saying these things are literally making them up. They don't know. And that's why it's so important to have conversations with you to get this out there, to get people to understand what's going on, to hear the truth about things, to hear it from someone who's been through that.
Right. I want people to hear about it from somebody who's lived it.
Yes, absolutely.
And I definitely have.
You definitely have.
And actually, I have no regrets about anything. I am grateful that I made it this far in life. And that I've had all these experiences.
Well, and I'm grateful that you're sharing those with us. Wendy, thank you for being here today and helping us demystify the terminology around gender and transgender. This has been such an enlightening conversation, and we have more in store for our audience. And to our audience, thank you for joining me and Wendy Cole today. If you're interested in learning more about Wendy, look for her website, meetwendycole.com. You can also find out more information about demystifying the transgender journey on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. Share this podcast with your curious and open-minded friends as we try to educate people and counter all the misinformation and disinformation that's out there on, especially on social media, about the transgender experience. I'm your host, Lynn Murphy, and I'm so grateful you were here today. Join us next time. We'll see you then. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Demystifying the Transgender Journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of our fascinating interviews. You can also find more information on our website, thetransgenderjourney.com. So until next time, stay curious and stay kind.